The courtroom was submerged in an oppressive silence, a quiet so thick it seemed to constrict the chest, making each breath a conscious effort. Every seat was filled, all eyes fixed on the man who held the room's fraught attention. Sergeant Roberto, wearing his military uniform despite being in a wheelchair, radiated dignity as the medals on his chest gleamed under the fluorescent lights. In one hand he held the leash of his loyal companion, Brutus, an imposing German shepherd with a gaze that was serene yet ever watchful. To those present, Brutus might have been just another service dog, but to Roberto, he was far more. He was family. As the judge began to speak, Roberto's expression hardened with resolve. This was his last chance to speak before an irrevocable decision was made. The High Command had ruled that Brutus, considered government property for a new mission, was to be transferred to another service. After years of fighting side by side, the very idea of losing Brutus struck Roberto like a cruel betrayal. His hands trembled as he adjusted his grip on the leash, and his voice, thick with raw emotion, echoed through the chamber. "Your Honor, Brutus is not just a military asset. He saved my life in ways no one here can imagine. On the battlefield, he pulled me from danger, shielded me from gunfire, and alerted me to traps before I could ever perceive them. And when I came home, broken and without strength, Brutus was there, giving me the will to go on. Please don't take him from me." A heavy, unspoken compassion filled the room. Some spectators wiped away tears, while others exchanged looks that mixed pity with indignation. The judge maintained an impassive facade, his eyes fixed on Roberto for a long moment, before he leaned forward to deliver his verdict. But before he could utter a single word, something unexpected happened. Brutus surged to his feet, pulling free from Roberto's trembling grasp. With a sudden lunge, the dog advanced toward the judge's bench, barking sharply. The sound ripped through the courtroom, drawing gasps and causing security to instinctively step forward. Though Brutus showed no aggression, his barks were insistent, laden with an urgency that seemed to warn of imminent danger. "Brutus!" Roberto cried, his voice choked with panic. Deep down, he knew this behavior. He had witnessed it countless times in the field when Brutus had detected hidden threats. Murmurs began to ripple through the gallery. Someone from the back called out, "What's wrong with the dog?" Roberto pushed his chair forward, his voice trembling but resolute. "He only barks like that when he senses danger. He's trying to warn us." The judge froze, the gavel forgotten in his hand as his eyes locked on Brutus. In that suspended moment, all sound vanished except for the dog's urgent barking, which pulsed like a frantic heartbeat. Brutus's warning wasn't just for Roberto. He sensed a danger no one else could see. For the first time that day, a spark of hope ignited in Roberto. This wasn't just a goodbye. Something far greater was about to unfold, and Brutus was determined to show them all. Each of Brutus's barks cut through the silence of the vast room, ricocheting off the dark, wood-paneled walls like a resounding call to arms. The dog remained in a low crouch, his body tense, ears pinned back, his eyes fixed on the judge's bench. Roberto gripped the arms of his wheelchair, knowing that Brutus's behavior was anything but random. His heart hammered in his chest, just as it had in combat. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a courtroom, a place of order. "Easy, boy," Roberto murmured, though his own voice wavered. Brutus shot a brief glance back, as if to assure his master he was in control, then resumed his measured advance before the bench. His barks deepened into grave snarls that sent a shiver through the audience. The initial compassion for Roberto quickly gave way to a palpable anxiety. Mr. Roberto, the judge interrupted, his tone laced with irritation. Control your dog, or I will be forced to. Your Honor, Roberto cut in, his voice rising, firmer now, despite the fear clutching at his chest. Brutus is not being stubborn. He was trained to detect explosives, threats, and unseen dangers. He would not behave this way unless something was truly wrong. A heavy silence fell once more as Roberto's words hung in the air. Then, suddenly, Brutus stopped barking. The abrupt quiet was as jarring as the barks that preceded it. The dog's body went completely rigid. His head snapped toward the back of the room. His ears perked, and a low, threatening growl rumbled from deep in his chest. The shift was so sudden and intense that even the judge seemed stunned, his gaze drifting toward the imposing wooden doors at the far end of the courtroom. A wave of collective dread washed over the room, turning whispers into frightened murmurs. Roberto's breathing quickened as he followed Brutus's fixed stare. His pulse throbbed in his ears, a grim reminder of moments in the field when this very behavior had foretold imminent disaster. Brutus, what is it? He whispered, his voice thick with tension. But Brutus did not move. He remained utterly still, his growl deepening into a severe warning. The danger the dog had detected no longer threatened just Roberto. It endangered every single person in that room. Brutus's low growl rumbled through the courtroom like distant thunder, freezing everyone in place. All eyes turned to the vigilant dog, whose intense gaze was locked on the heavy wooden doors. Even the judge, who moments before had been on the verge of reprimanding Roberto, now looked visibly shaken. The gavel lay abandoned as he exchanged nervous glances with the security guards. The air was charged with an inexplicable, almost electric tension, while Roberto held onto the arms of his chair as if bracing for the worst. He had witnessed Brutus's intuition save their lives on the battlefield countless times. The silent order he repeated to himself, "Stay calm," felt hollow against the rising tide of dread. One of the guards, a man with broad shoulders and a wary expression, finally stepped forward. "He's just a dog, isn't he?" he muttered, though his voice betrayed his apprehension as his hand rested on the weapon at his belt. "No," Roberto replied, his voice rising just enough to cut through the anxious whispers. "Brutus doesn't bark at noise or commotion. He was trained to sense danger, to perceive what we cannot see. Trust me, if he's like this, there's a reason." The judge, visibly unnerved, signaled for the guards to approach the door. One of them hesitantly reached out to touch the cold metal of the handle, and the tension in the room climbed to a new peak. Every muscle in Roberto's body tensed as he watched Brutus, who remained motionless, his growls turning to short, sharp barks as the door began to swing open. On the other side, a dark hallway was revealed. At first glance, it appeared empty, but as Brutus's barks intensified, it became clear that something was hidden in the shadows. The guard, his weapon now drawn, stepped cautiously into the corridor. His face went pale, and seconds later, his voice broke the silence. "There's something here." Roberto's heart hammered against his ribs as he leaned forward in his chair, his stomach tight with anxiety. Whatever that guard had seen had already triggered Brutus's instincts, and Roberto knew one thing for certain. Brutus was never wrong. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, as if the very air was being consumed by tension. Brutus's barks ricocheted off the wooden walls as he maintained his rigid stance, every muscle on high alert, staring into the dark corridor. The guard, visibly unsettled, took another hesitant step, his footfalls echoing on the tile floor. his hand still near his weapon, as if expecting something to leap from the shadows at any moment. "What's happening out there?" the judge demanded, his voice trembling as he tried to reestablish order. He gripped his gavel tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes darting between the door and Brutus. The dog's growl deepened, becoming a threatening rumble that made everyone present shudder. The guard, turning back toward the courtroom, confessed in a low, hesitant voice, "I don't see anything, but something isn't right. It's too quiet." The phrase hung like a premonition in the oppressive silence. Roberto leaned further forward in his chair, his stomach churning with anxiety. He had heard that kind of warning on the battlefield, and it always preceded disaster. "Brutus doesn't react like this if there's no danger," he insisted, his voice rising above the nervous murmurs. "We need to evacuate. Now." But the command, filled with urgency, failed to produce the desired effect. Panic was beginning to paralyze the room. A younger guard moved forward, a wavering flashlight beam cutting through the corridor's darkness. "There's nothing here," he muttered, though his trembling hand betrayed his fear. Even as he spoke, Brutus's barks intensified, his body straining against the leash, nearly breaking the connection to Roberto. It was then that a sharp, sudden metallic clang erupted from the hallway, a sinister signal in the suffocating quiet. The sound was so clear it made the younger guard stumble back, the flashlight shaking wildly in his hand. Without hesitation, Brutus lunged toward the noise, barking furiously, his claws scraping against the floor. Shrieks and gasps filled the room as panic began to set in. The senior guard drew his weapon, his voice tight with alarm. "What the hell was that?" Roberto, his heart racing, raised his voice above the tumult. "Get back with Brutus!" he shouted, his voice a mixture of fear and conviction. "He is never wrong. Something is coming." Before anyone could react, the metallic clang repeated, this time louder and closer, as if the source of the sound were rapidly approaching. An invisible, terrifying presence seemed to flood the room. It was clear that what Brutus had sensed was not a mere possibility. It was imminent. The metallic sound echoed again, sharper and nearer, like an alarm sounding from the depths of the corridor. The tension in the courtroom tightened its grip, and Brutus barked with a renewed fury, straining against the leash as if to break the one thing holding him back. Roberto clenched the leash until his knuckles turned white, his pulse hammering. Something terrible was about to happen. Something was coming. Summoning his courage, the senior guard stepped fully into the hallway, weapon raised, his eyes scanning the gloom. His partner followed cautiously, holding a flashlight that trembled in his hand. The beam sliced through the darkness, but revealed nothing more than an empty, silent corridor. Yet, Brutus's persistent barks and low growls told a different story. Roberto's instincts screamed for action, for an immediate evacuation, but terror held everyone captive. "Do you see anything?" the judge demanded, his voice cracking as he leaned forward, the gavel trembling in his hand. His once firm authority was now laced with fear. The senior guard, his face slick with sweat, murmured in a low tone, "Still nothing. But it's not right." He took another hesitant step, his footfalls echoing in the empty hall, while the spectators fidgeted with anxiety, some grabbing their belongings, others inching toward the exits. Roberto pushed his chair forward, his eyes fixed on Brutus, who had suddenly fallen silent. The dog stood perfectly still, ears pricked, his gaze locked on the open doorway. "I don't know what it is, but it's there," Roberto muttered, his voice heavy with dread. Then, as the guards advanced halfway down the corridor, A fleeting shadow darted through the flashlight's beam. The younger guard staggered backward, the beam shaking. "There's someone there!" he exclaimed in a panicked, barely audible whisper, as the light briefly revealed a tall, imposing silhouette that quickly dissolved back into the darkness. The glimpse was enough to send a chill of terror through the room. The senior guard tightened his grip on his weapon and commanded in a low, authoritative voice, "Show yourself. Step into the light, where I can see you." But the only response was a thick, oppressive silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Suddenly, as if emerging from a nightmare, a figure began to slowly take shape in the flashlight's glow. It was a man, his face partially hidden by a dark hood, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of a long coat. His movements were measured and deliberate, his posture radiating a disturbing calm amidst the rising chaos. The man stopped at the edge of the light, tilting his head slightly, as if he found the entire scene amusing. At the sight of him, Brutus's growl erupted into a ferocious snarl, his claws scraping the floor as Roberto fought to hold him back. "Who are you?" the larger guard demanded, his weapon held steady on the intruder. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took another slow, calculated step, an ironic smile forming beneath his hood. Roberto's heart seemed to stop for an instant, as a sense of foreboding washed over him. There was something deeply wrong with this man, not just a threat, but a presence that emanated an undeniable evil. Slowly, the stranger raised his hands in a placating gesture and spoke, his voice calm and icy. "Calm yourselves. I'm not here to hurt anyone." But the way his words hung in the air only deepened the chill that was spreading through the room. Roberto knew instantly that the man was lying, and Brutus seemed to confirm this instinct with his fixed gaze. The silence that followed was absolute, as the man remained at the edge of the hallway, partially lit by the flickering beam of a flashlight. Brutus's growls became a continuous, deep rumble, vibrating through the courtroom, and the guards held their weapons with trembling hands, despite years of training. With his heart pounding, Roberto stared at the stranger. The man's posture was too calm, too deliberate, as if he fed on the tension he created. "Advance slowly," the larger guard commanded, his voice a mixture of authority and fear. The man tilted his head slightly and took another step, his footsteps echoing softly on the tiled floor. He moved with a disturbing confidence, as if savoring every second he held their attention. Brutus barked furiously, and Roberto struggled to hold him back, his hands slick with sweat. "Brutus, no," he murmured, his voice trembling. "He senses something. Something isn't right." Though his words barely reached the others, the judge shot him a brief look of fear and confusion. The smaller guard moved forward, holding his flashlight steady while keeping his other hand near his holster. "Sir, identify yourself now," he demanded, his voice strained. Finally, the stranger lifted his hood, partially revealing his face. His eyes were cold, piercing, and held an intensity that chilled Roberto to the bone. "I am not here to cause harm," he repeated, his tone both calm and unsettling. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, causing both guards to flinch and raise their weapons. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Someone in the back whispered, "He has something." The air felt thick enough to shatter. Paralyzed by fear, Roberto clutched Brutus's leash as if it were his only lifeline. From his pocket, the stranger pulled out a small, metallic object. In unison, the guards shouted, "Drop it!" The man paused, a sinister smile forming on his lips. "Calm yourselves," he said softly, holding the object up in the dim light, which glinted off a simple keychain. But instead of easing the tension, it only deepened the sense of danger. Brutus remained focused on the man, barking incessantly, as if the keychain were merely a distraction from something far worse. Roberto tightened his grip on the leash and muttered to himself, "It's not what it seems. He's hiding something." The stranger's smile widened, as if he could hear Roberto's thoughts, while an oppressive weight filled the room. All eyes were fixed on the man, whose smirk contrasted with the panic spreading among the onlookers. Brutus's barks turned into a deep, continuous growl, a warning that could not be ignored. Roberto's hands shook, and his chest felt ready to burst with instincts that screamed of danger. "Drop the key and step back," the larger guard ordered again, his aim unwavering. The smaller guard advanced cautiously, his face pale with uncertainty. Unfazed by the pointed guns, the stranger tilted his head slowly, his gaze shifting to Brutus. "You know, this dog is special. He always senses what's about to happen before it does. That's what makes him so valuable," he said, his tone almost casual but loaded with a sinister authority. Roberto's stomach twisted. "How do you know that?" he demanded, his voice sharp and trembling. In response, Brutus barked with greater intensity, lunging as if to shield Roberto from an unseen danger. The stranger's smile deepened, his eyes glinting with a dark light as he raised the key again. "You'll find out soon enough," he stated, with a blood-chilling certainty. With a metallic click, he turned the key in his hand. The sound, subtle yet full of foreboding, had an immediate effect. In an instant, Brutus flew into a frenzy, barking louder than ever. Before anyone could react, the courtroom lights flickered violently, then plunged the room into complete darkness. In that terrifying void, Roberto heard gasps, screams, and the scraping of chairs as people scrambled in panic. When the lights flickered back on, the stranger was no longer alone. As if summoned from the shadows themselves, two more figures had emerged from the hallway. Their faces remained hidden, but their deliberate, menacing movements, along with the glint of their weapons, made their sinister intentions clear. Roberto's heart hammered against his ribs as he saw Brutus, now growling with an almost primal intensity. This was no longer about one man with a key. It had escalated into something much larger, much darker. The courtroom descended into absolute chaos. People ran for the exits, their voices a jumble of confusion and terror, and the sound of chairs dragging across the floor filled the air. The two new figures advanced slowly into the room, their mere presence heightening the sense of desperation. Brutus continued to bark incessantly, his body low to the ground, every muscle coiled and ready to spring. Roberto gripped the leash, adrenaline surging through his veins. He knew without a doubt that the stranger wasn't bluffing. Brutus was the reason they were here. "Maintain order!" the judge roared, banging his gavel, though his voice was nearly drowned out by the spreading panic. The larger guard stepped forward, keeping his flashlight fixed on the intruder. "Stay where you are," he ordered. But the stranger did not retreat. Instead, he took another slow step, his expression disturbingly calm. The two figures behind him matched his pace, adding to the suffocating tension. Finally, the stranger's voice cut through the tumult, smooth and measured. "No one needs to get hurt. All I want is the dog." His words, spoken with cold authority, sent a shiver down Roberto's spine. Brutus growled low, his eyes locked on the stranger, unblinking. Heart pounding, Roberto pushed his chair forward, holding Brutus's leash tightly. "You are not taking Brutus," he declared, his voice firm, though it trembled with emotion. "He's not just a dog, he's my partner, my family. I don't care who you are or what you want, you will not take him." His words echoed in the courtroom, silencing the murmurs as all eyes turned to the standoff. The stranger's smile faded as he watched Roberto intently. "You're complicating something that could be simple," he replied coldly, his gaze shifting back to Brutus. "He is special, yes, but keeping him will only bring you more trouble." Roberto clenched his jaw and answered firmly, "Brutus stays with me." His voice was resolute, making it clear there would be no negotiation. Around them, the murmurs intensified, some calling for calm, others whispering fearfully about what might happen next. The tension was unbearable, each second stretching into an eternity. Suddenly, Brutus let out a sharp, piercing bark, drawing everyone's attention. His gaze was fixed on the stranger, as if he understood exactly what was at stake. With grim determination, Roberto leaned forward, ready to defend the one being who had never abandoned him. Whatever the stranger's purpose, one thing was clear. Brutus wasn't going anywhere, and this standoff was far from over. A palpable tension held the courtroom in its grip. Every person seemed frozen as the stranger stood motionless, his eyes locked on Brutus. The dog's growl, low and constant like distant thunder, served as a reminder that his body was coiled, ready to strike at any moment. Roberto held the leash with both hands, meeting the intruder's gaze with a determination that mirrored his partner's unwavering loyalty. The two figures behind the stranger stood still, their presence menacing, but they did not advance. It was a stalemate that felt as if it could last forever. Breaking the heavy silence, the judge cleared his throat and, with all the authority he could muster, declared, "You have disrupted a court proceeding. This ends now. Guards, escort these men out." His voice, though trembling, carried enough weight to attempt to restore some semblance of order. The guards, regaining their composure, advanced cautiously. Brutus barked once more, baring his teeth as he tracked the intruder's every move. The stranger slowly raised a hand, signaling for his companions to hold back. His expression shifted from defiance to a calm resignation. "This isn't over," he stated, his tone thick with foreboding. "You think this is just about the dog, but it's part of something much larger. Soon you will all understand." With a final cold smile, he took a step back. "For now, I will leave. But know this, Roberto. He belongs to us, and we will be back." Roberto tightened his grip on Brutus's leash, his eyes fixed on the stranger. "He belongs to no one but me, and whatever you're looking for, you'll have to go through us to get it." His words rang out like a challenge, and for the first time the stranger seemed to hesitate. His eyes narrowed as he sized Roberto up, and then, without another word, he turned and signaled for his companions to follow. The tension only broke when the trio disappeared through the same door they had entered. A heavy silence then fell over the courtroom. Slowly, the spectators returned to their seats, murmuring as they tried to process what had just happened. The judge let out a long sigh, and with a still trembling hand, brought down his gavel. "This session is adjourned," he announced, his weary voice nearly lost in the whispers that still filled the air. But Roberto remained seated, his eyes fixed on the door, while Brutus finally began to relax, his growls subsiding into a low, alert hum. Gently, Roberto leaned down and stroked his dog's head. "You were incredible, old friend," he murmured, his voice filled with gratitude and exhaustion. Even as the courtroom emptied, Roberto stayed there, lost in thought. He still didn't understand who the hooded man was or why he wanted Brutus. But one thing was certain: this was not over. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, Roberto knew he would face them with Brutus by his side. The bond between them, forged in adversity and on battlefields, was unbreakable, something no one could ever take from them.